All right, we are live. Welcome to Social Business Hour on this, shall I say, 420, April 20th, 2015. I'm your host, co-host Brian Fanzo, known as iSocialFans on the Twitters. As always, we are on Google Hangout. We are SBiz Hour on the Twitters. We got Meerkat going. We got Periscope going. We are fully going as many omni-channel possibilities that exist. And as always, I'm joined by the one and only awesome co-host and chief listener over at Pipeliner, Rachel Miller. How are you today, Rachel?
Hey everyone. Hey Brian. Hey Koka. I'm super excited, as always, my favorite day of the week, and this is a topic near and dear to our hearts. This is social selling is the reason why we started over a year ago, so it's always fun to kind of go back to our roots and discuss what's happened over the last 12 months, social selling-wise.
No, yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's funny because social selling hour or social business hour for those that are tuning in. Rachel and I started this a little over a year ago with the hashtag SS Hour, which stood for Social Selling Hour, and we ran that through the end of the year, and then slightly rebranded and kind of focused the Social Business Hour concept. A lot to do with really all of the different aspects that have to do with truly what a social business is, and social selling, of course, is a major piece, and content and marketing and all of these other elements that we wanted to cover on this show. And I'm excited. One of my favorite people when it comes to talking about social selling, talking about content, also works for the home, or I'd say the first stop of all of the digital first impressions that exist for everybody is LinkedIn. And Koka Sexton is joining us finally, long-awaited debut on Social Business Hour. Koka, welcome to the show. Introduce everybody. I'm pretty sure our audience knows who you are, but go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I'm Koka Sexton. I wouldn't want to assume that everybody knows who I am. I am a content marketing manager here at LinkedIn. I used to work on the sales solutions team because social selling is so near and dear to my heart. I've been doing talking about and evangelizing and practicing and implementing social selling strategies for probably the last 4 or 5 years, and recently just moved into the consumer marketing side here at LinkedIn. But I'm very happy. Brian and I have known each other in the social sphere for a long time, and we've only been face to face like this maybe twice, and I've never met either of you in person. So this is the pleasure is all mine. I'm happy to be able to do this for you guys.
That's truly that power of social, right? It's the crazy thing. Like, I'm commenting on, I was at the Lego store and looked on Instagram, and you had posted a picture of your Lego blocks with your kids, and I feel like I relate. I'm wishing your kids happy birthdays, and it's like, Facebook friends for a year, and yet we still haven't met face to face. Hopefully, we'll fix that with a couple trips that we got planned in the near future to San Francisco. But that is definitely one of those aspects that I think only can happen in this social space that we're at today. So I know you work at LinkedIn. I think everyone knows that. I'm curious, before we get into question one, and we're letting people, with the hashtag SBizHour on Twitter, our show is sponsored by IBM and the New Way to Work. And IBM is kind of reinventing what email it looks like with their new product called IBM Verse. So for our audience, check out ibm.com/verse. And, Koka, I think LinkedIn has been not only in the news, been owning the news over the last couple months with some awesome acquisitions. Rachel and I think we talked about Refresh.io for every week, I think, for months on end on how much we love that tool. I, of course, come from employee advocacy side of the house, social business, that side of the world. So not only have some of those major changes in LinkedIn, and it's exciting times, but give us a little bit of where your role was before and what you're doing now, and kind of how that morphed, because I think that also kind of has morphed in the social selling space. I know our friend and advocate and great guy Carlos Gill has kind of stepped into what your old role was, but kind of give us a little background on the changes of LinkedIn.
So the backstory is that when I got brought onto LinkedIn, being the dream job that it was, I honestly won't go into my entire story, but getting the opportunity to work for a company like LinkedIn was not in my 5-year plan. I just didn't think it was going to be possible. But then again, I'm usually humbled by these things. So it was a big opportunity to be able to do this and to take my passion, my ownership in the social selling space into a company that I was really near and dear to my heart. And what my goal was to make it so that the people who were really interested in social selling and wanted to know how do you leverage social media in a sales context, they had someone to listen to, not somebody. And Brian, you and I have gone back and forth on Twitter about this. It's about being the voice and not the echo. And there's a lot of people who are echoing it, and I felt like I had a very strong voice in it, and people were hearing me. But obviously, when I came to LinkedIn, that made a huge shift. All of a sudden, as much, I want to say, authority I had in the space, because I was already one of the primary people speaking about it. Once we were able to put the LinkedIn logo behind it, it made a big difference, and we saw that shift, and I felt that shift in my own career and in the ecosystem. So being able to evangelize social selling in the context of LinkedIn and help them launch the Sales Navigator product back in August of last year, is really it's an accomplishment that I feel very strongly with. And in that process, over the course of the last few years, as much as social selling is important, content is what's helping drive a lot of that. And I recognized that very early on, even prior to being at LinkedIn. And one of the things that really stood out was that we needed more content around what LinkedIn does and the value that provides outside of a sales context, just in general. Like, how do people use LinkedIn? And we see things like employee advocacy and the recent acquisition of like lynda.com and the other things that we're doing in the space, and it's this vision that the company has about creating economic opportunity is coming to fruition, and these acquisitions are just enabling that. So it's very exciting to be in the company at this point in time, seeing all the stuff that they're doing in this space, and a lot of it does tie back into social selling in some way, because all of these new features and functionalities and acquisitions and tools that are being added into the set are going to just enable salespeople to be even more effective. Professionals in general, but in the context of this, salespeople specifically.
No, I love that, because I think we often, I know I talk about it all the time, is that unfortunately, people talk about how much they love LinkedIn, and yet they only use it when they're looking for a job, right? And actually, it's in my keynote that I just gave last week, where I was like, why would you update your wardrobe every year to create better first impressions, but you haven't updated your LinkedIn profile in 3 years? And it's like a soapbox, because I think you're not only are you guys onto something, but I love the idea that now it's more about gross education. It's education in not only multiple different ways, but the power of the data, the aspect of I actually implemented the selling aspect of the tool at my last company, so that we were able, it was one of my first proven ROIs of social media, is when I was able to take the LinkedIn data and really connect that to my sales team through the Sales Navigator that I know you were a big part of. So I think it leads us perfectly into what question number one is, and I think I would love to kind of hear you kind of talk about what you think the definition is today and kind of how it's changed, since you kind of started Evangelist. What is your definition of truly social selling?
So the definition that we run through here at LinkedIn is, social selling is leveraging your professional brand to fill your pipeline with the right people, insights, and relationships. And my personal definition is very close to that. When they were deciding on what the definition was of social selling from a company, there was a lot of inputs, and when it really boiled down to it, they were very conscious about the words that they used. And I do feel, as much as social selling is about becoming mini marketers and all these other things, at the end of the day, what really matters to salespeople is building your pipeline, and you're not going to be an effective salesperson unless you can do that. So that's why that was right up there at top. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you have a professional brand, unless your profile is polished, unless you are putting your best foot forward and being seen as a reputable source in the space. Nobody's really going to pay attention to you. You're not going to have any authentic relationships. Leveraging the insights, there's a lot of ways to do that. And within LinkedIn, with the profiles that people can build out, and the data that you're able to get by doing advanced searches and all these other aspects of how people should be leveraging LinkedIn, you can gain a lot of insights, and it helps you find the right people. And ultimately, what this really comes down to, and just because it's the last keyword in the entire definition, doesn't mean that it should be diminished in any way. It's about building relationships. And at the end of the day, you are not successful in any career, specifically within sales, unless you're able to build effective relationships. And these relationships are not transactional. They have to be, authentic. They have to be real. Because in this day and age, I believe that buyers, when they feel a transactional relationship or they feel that somebody is being inauthentic in the way that they're talking or the way that they're engaging with you, like they can smell it now. Just a few years ago, I don't think they could, because everybody just got all hyped up. Oh, I got connected with this person, or this person's mentioning me on Twitter, or whatever it may be. But I think now, because the evolution is taking place, people are being able to sniff through that a lot more quickly. So being able to leverage the right insights to meet these people, to build these relationships, is extremely important.
I'm going to say that I'm pretty sure we always could tell when somebody was out to ultimately just close the deal, or it's the end of the month, you're getting that call. I think that hasn't changed at all. So in the context of what you're saying, sales is okay. Social. So for me, social selling is a inept term for what the whole process is. And I know you talked a whole lot about personal branding and positioning on sites like LinkedIn and how you engage on Twitter. For you, is there truly a selling aspect in there, or are you just positioning yourself as a trusted advisor, which is the first step, but you're not really going for the hard sell?
Well, having a basis in sales and going for the hard sell are two different things. I think that if you're in sales, your job is to sell, and your job is to drive revenue for whatever company it is that you're working for. So if you are not doing that on social media, if you're not building those relationships and moving towards that sale, you're actually wasting your time. Now, that being said, no, you shouldn't be doing the hard sale. You shouldn't be connecting with people and going right for the pitch. You shouldn't be having a lot of inauthentic conversations and basically, the spray and pray across social media, basically the equivalent of, making 100 cold calls, but doing it through, connections on LinkedIn or tweets or whatever it may be, because that just doesn't work. So I do think it's about becoming a trusted advisor. What we have found is the data shows that you are exponentially more likely to get engaged with these decision makers when you are seen as a thought leader in the space. And the only way to do that is to have a professional brand. The only way to do that is by partnering up with marketing and the other, the cross-functional teams to start feeding you the right content that's going to be able to be put out into the marketplace, so that people actually see, like, hey, Koka Sexton is actually sharing this stuff. He's becoming a resource for me as a company. And then you become the trusted resource that you can then kind of go in and ask for the the meeting or the deal or whatever it may be. I see Brian's bookshelf behind him, and there's one of the books back there is from Gary Vaynerchuk, the jab, 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 right hook. And I think that kind of really nails it down. Is in this new way of doing business, you have to be adding value in multitudes above what you're actually asking for in return. And if you're not adding value, multiple times before you make that ask, people are going to get turned off from you. We're not in especially in the B2B space, most people are not in a transactional business. There are multiple decision makers in the process. There are many people that you need to talk to about different things, and you have to build these relationships before you can actually go in and actually ask for the deal. Even though most of these people, when you're in a sales opportunity, they know that the deal is in the process. They know that that's the end game. You have to be able to build that relationship over time and show that when you say something, you actually mean it, and that when they have questions, that you can actually provide the right answers. Because if you can't do that, some other sales rep out there or some other company is going to be built the right way to be able to give that customer or these buyers that information that's going to make them want to make the decision with them.
Well, I think I love that description. I think also this whole idea. I mean, you talked about having to work with marketing. You talked about having to understand the product, having to actually be an expert and not just act like one. I think that's part of this change. And I think it's interesting because in all this space, I think the sales conversation. I talk about a lot. The reason my dad taught us golf is because you build relationships on the golf course, and then those relationships are the ones that come to you to make the sell. And you referenced jab, 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 right hook, and I think too often today, when people are initially thinking of social selling, they don't understand the jab aspect. They've lived the right hook aspect. They understand that they have to be social offline to make sales work, but for whatever reason, they take this idea of, okay, well, social gives me the easy access into every one of these people's, I'd say disruption of their day, right? You get a notification when someone mentions you or tags you in a picture. I think, unfortunately, people kind of just, they look for that shortcut, look for that easy button. What do you think? And I know LinkedIn is focusing on not only with the recent acquisitions, but the training aspect and the maturing and really understanding that all of these gives lead up to that ultimate ask. Where do you see, I'd say, the companies that are embracing social selling quickly? How do they make those, what are those quick wins they get initially that allow them to understand that the jab is something you have to do before the right hook, or you'll ruin it and you'll never have a chance to go back and do the jab after?
Well, I think one of the low-hanging fruits, the items that if you want to call it a quick win, that we can measure, is who are you connecting with? And when you can measure that your sales teams are connecting with the decision makers across the industry that you're focused on, that's a win. Because many times what was happening was sales reps were connecting with anybody they wanted to, and it was kind of like the Wild West, and they weren't really focusing on who the decision makers were in these companies. And one of the things that great salespeople were doing were they craft amazing, Boolean searches within LinkedIn to be able to find those decision makers within an advanced search. Whereas Sales Navigator helps navigate, or pardon the pun, get to those people much quicker. So I think that measuring the effectiveness of how your sales teams are connecting with those right individuals, those decision makers, and what the layer is of the suggested people, these recommended individuals within the company that you need to be connecting with also, I think that's one of the first steps. Because if you're connecting with the right people, and then you are supplementing that with the right information, and that you are building those relationships, and you're having the right conversations and asking the tough questions. And I think that's another thing that salespeople don't do very much because they think very transactional. It's all about me, me, me. It's asking the tough questions that can open up that can of worms that you can then sift through to kind of figure out where the solution really is. I think that's where those are the jabs, because once you line all of those things up, once you have all those ducks in a row, it's very easy for both the buyer and the seller to be able to look at it and say, you know what, you're right. This is exactly what we need to do, and let's just get this done today.
Well, it's funny. We always thought the reputation is that only millennials are the me, 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 me. Maybe it's the salespeople and the millennials. I think maybe it's a different conversation.
That's a different conversation.
But so I am really pleased with how LinkedIn has evolved over the years. I think it's kind of stifled the lions a little bit. Just connecting with people for the sake of connecting. Now it's so easy to be incredibly tactical and find who you really should be connecting with.
I get it. I see it. I want to have 30,000 connections on LinkedIn, but just on the public data that's available, one of the great things about the new product Elevate is that you're able, the leaderboards, you're able to see engagements. I would assume, and I have no data to back any of this up, but I would assume that people who are lions that have 30,000 connections actually have the lowest engagement rates across LinkedIn. And
I will guarantee it. But there was even an icon. I don't know if it still exists, the Open Networker icon. It was even advocated that was a cool thing for a while.
Yeah. I used to have it. I thought it was cool too. But at the end of the day, I still wouldn't connect with anybody. I just wanted to let people know that they could connect with me.
That's not cool. You can't say come on in and then no.
But I think that building your network in a strategic way and having your own personal connection philosophy is what really matters. And to me, it's never been about numbers. One of the reasons why I feel that I have been somewhat successful in my career is that even when I was just focused on social media, to me, it was never about vanity metrics. I never cared how many followers I had, personally or for the company I worked for, or how many connections I had on LinkedIn. At the end of the day, it's all about engagement. And I would rather have, 200 people connected with me and having 200 legitimate engagements than have 30,000 connections and have 15 engagements, because those engagements are what actually will move the needle.
No, I love that, and I think it's also kind of a little bit in the aspect of times have changed. So I mean, especially social more so than anything. I think when 4 years ago, there was lots of things. I think with the way we were building followers or we were building networks was so much different. And even the way brands even approached it, being a one-way communication channel, and this idea of trust wasn't something they worried about. I mean, I like to think of it as that social before is being used as a billboard. It was that one-way, hey, you drive by, this is what you see, we're going to blast, blast, blast. And I think with that change, I think sometimes we forget that our strategy has to change with it. Like, because social and the tools have changed, now your strategy has to change. And if your strategy used to be, or you're before you were using these tools just to build follower numbers, what does that do in your strategy? How does that solve a business problem? How does that make that relationship stronger? And I think
it's looking really cool that you have 1 million followers.
Right, and unfortunately, I think there's still this ability to the reach aspect, right? I mean, there is some kind of
if the reach isn't actually engaging.
Well,
right?
But I think it's key. It's not even reach; it's potential reach, and I think that's. I have this conversation almost on an hourly basis with people. And those numbers are kind of, I mean, they're shit for the most part because it's potential reach, but when you run the engagement and you have 0.001% engagement on your Twitter handle, your reach is not the 20 million that is predicted. It's like 10. So I think people really need to understand the metrics that they're striving for. And
what you were saying earlier, I think that, most companies, when they first started embracing social, like the actual ones that were actually leveraging social media, they didn't know it any different. They took the social out of it, and it was just still marketing. So it was just a broadcast model. And there's still a lot of companies that only use it as a broadcast mechanism. And some of them are actually doing it fairly successfully. But the ones that are actually making ground and the ones that are being the ones that are talked about in the industry are the ones that are engaging. And, Brian, I see you doing it all the time. I actually test certain brands sometimes where I'll just tweet to them and see what's going on. But I love it when I see that, I ask a question. Like, somebody had a question about me, food delivery in San Francisco, and I just tweeted out, get a hold of Grubhub. And Grubhub was on that in seconds. And, I've been telling the story over the last couple of weeks where, Nespresso, I had mentioned something about Nespresso, and then they were able to reach back out to me within a few minutes. Hotels are getting better at it. That engagement is what actually drives brand loyalty, and it makes me feel that they're actually listening and they care. Companies are only broadcasting over and over again. They're not engaging. Like it's nice to kind of see what's happening in their company from time to time, but I want to be able to engage with them, and I think that's where most of this is getting lost. That they're taking the social out of social media.
So I'm really curious to hear, step out of the bubble, pretend that, I know nothing about social business, LinkedIn, or social selling. How would you explain the importance of social selling to me? Why should I do it?
Well, why should you do it? Why wouldn't you do it? Well, we do know that your buyers are on social media. We do know that your buyers, are leveraging social media in the buying process. We know that more of them are in senior level positions. They're leveraging their networks to figure out how to solve business problems. They're either mentioning the stuff like for LinkedIn specifically within a group, or they're putting in a status update. We also know, based on the data that the research we had done with the IDC, that these decision makers are willing to spend more money. So the misconception that people are leveraging social media or looking for a discount is not true. So they're using social media, they're spending more money, and they're actually spending it more often. Because at the end of the day, companies are funded in order to solve business problems. And it doesn't matter if it is a little bit more expensive. If it is solving the right business problem, they're willing to spend more money. And they're willing to spend more money more often if it's actually solving their business problem. So leveraging social media helps through the entire buying process. Why it's important for a salesperson is you need to have legitimacy. You have to be seen as that trusted resource outside of the logo that is on your business card. Because when you are approaching one of these decision makers, they're looking at you as an individual. Your logo is nice. Chances are there's some trust in it, which is why they're having the conversation with you. But when they're searching you, when they're looking at your profile, when they're seeing what you talk about, when they're seeing the things that you post in other social networks, if there is something that is off kilter there, it's going to leave a mark. And you have to be approaching your life, as a professional in all aspects of your social identity. And if you're doing this the right way, that when they do see you, they're going to realize, wait, this guy is somebody I actually want to be connected with, and that's where the relationship starts.
I was going to pause and wait for Brian to jump in there about the personal and professional and all aspects of your social life. But
yeah, you had me smiling, that's for sure. You know, and I love the way you actually broke down also the value of social selling, but then also the value for sales. Because I think, you know, I actually was talking about the value of social selling for the HR tech community last week in the aspect that there's so much listening data out there that they could leverage that to better understand their current employees, future prospects, all of these things. And you used your example of tweeting out about, you know, hey, I want to know about a delivery service. And you might not have even tagged a company in that, but a company that understands the power of social is listening for not only when they are mentioned, but also when they're not, and it's around a, you know, if it's geography or if it's, you know, a specific hashtag or a set of keywords. And I think unfortunately when we look at traditional what social selling was there was all these kind of, I'd say, lines, but we kind of forgot all of the power of the data aspect. So I was glad to see that you not only talked about the data and the importance on the social selling concept, but also for the sales. Now, LinkedIn from a data perspective, you know, kind of takes an approach. I love that it used to be into your average profile, and now, you know, I can tell you, you know, I still love the ability to know whenever someone else is looking at my LinkedIn profile, but I can tell you I proactively use me publicly being able to, for them to see that I'm looking at their profile, because I want them to know that I'm listening. I use that as a strategy all the time, that I'm going to go visit somebody, you know, LinkedIn profile, so they know that I'm looking. So when you think about this social data, how is the data? I think the data has actually driven some of this drastic change from a social perspective, because it's now even more powerful, because a lot of that feedback we were craving offline is already available for us online.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this in numerous occasions. You know, when I was in sales, you know, marketing, I'm not going to go into my issues with marketing, but they used to just throw leads over the fence. And I'd have a database on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis of here's the people you're supposed to call. I called it my digital phone book. But what I started finding was that people were touching my profile based on things I was doing within LinkedIn groups or updates or whatever it may be. And I used to hit most of my number just following up on the people who touched my profile. And because I knew if they're hitting my profile, it was for one of two reasons. Either they saw something I was doing on LinkedIn and then they came back to my profile, or they had heard about me and done a search, but somehow they had come to my profile, and they fit my buyer persona. If they were these decision makers that I'd want to do business with, I would always reach out to them. And many, you know, it was, I want to say 99% of the time when I did that, they would reconnect with me. You know, that's when, you know, when I was in sales, I built an entire strategy around driving as much traffic to my profile as possible. So, you know, it used to have, you know, on Twitter, I used to have my personal, my kokasexton.com website as my URL on Twitter. I switched that, and it's been that way for years now, where it now points to my LinkedIn profile, because I want to see people come to my profile. If you're finding me on Twitter, I want you to come to my profile, and I want you to connect with me, because if you're following me on Twitter, we should be connected on LinkedIn as well. You know, and you know, I think it's a solid strategy, having people come to your profile, seeing who those people are. It's not about vanity. It's not about seeing how many profile views you actually get compared to everybody else, which is really nice, still nice to see. Carlos is currently above me, so Carlos, if you're watching, you do get props. But at the end of the day, you know, it's about who's coming to your profile and trying to figure out very quickly, based on the profile data that you can see, are these people that I actually want to be connected with? And I have made some great relationships, and I've made some great connections over the years because of other things that I've done in the social space that have driven traffic to my LinkedIn profile.
I love everything you're saying right now. That's part of the strategy that I use at Pipeliner and a couple other brands. I encourage everybody to add their LinkedIn to their most active social networks, and Twitter, hands down, is mine, and I drive a lot of traffic to my LinkedIn profile. And I make sure I check it, you know, 5-6 times a day, who's viewed. I'm very proactive with reaching out to people who are interesting to me, and it works like a charm. That is like that. If you're looking for an easy button for social selling, that is your easy button. Just pay attention to who's looking at you. Be interested to be interesting, as they say. Fire back. Can I help you with something? And you'll be surprised at how your engagement increases.
Well, let me play devil's advocate real quick, because I think both of you said. I mean, this is I couldn't agree more, but too often people assume I put my LinkedIn profile link in my Twitter account, and they're going to drive traffic to my LinkedIn profile. Where's all my sales coming, right? And both of you talked about how then I understand that it has to fit in my persona, and then I follow the right people, then I engage. Rachel talks about it that she goes and checks it 4 times a day. That is actually effort required. Even if your LinkedIn profile, and they're getting your LinkedIn profile, you actually have to engage. I think that, unfortunately, seems to be like the misnomer. It's like you drive them to the page, you get them there, and then you either accept everybody and you never engage, or you don't even take the proactive spot. I mean, I can't tell you how many social selling expert gurus that I've had conversations with. We're talking about something. They'll click on LinkedIn and they'll show me that they have 100 some plus ad friend requests on ad connection requests on LinkedIn, and they go, I don't even feel like dealing with that. Everybody visits my page, and I'm just like, wow, like you've missed not only all these opportunities, but how can you be taking all these other steps inside of CRMs and all these things if you're not taking the easy button approach that you already have feeding in front of you? So I think I just wanted to caveat that because I think you guys are doing it great. I think, unfortunately, some people look at it and say, oh, so I just put my LinkedIn profile here, and once they're on my page, they're ready to buy. And I think you guys do a great example of going above.
Once they hit your LinkedIn profile, they're ready to pay attention. And that's where the jabbing really starts. And if they're hitting your profile and you're reaching out with a hard sales tactic right then and there, you're wrong. And in fact, Carlos just wrote a blog post. I see it every day. I'm sure all of you, everybody who's watching this sees it as well. Like it's bad form. When somebody reaches out to you on LinkedIn, like that is the moment when the relationship is starting. It's not when you're supposed to be going for the transaction. In fact, I've been getting a little bit more upset about it over time, because in the beginning I understood that it was kind of the mentality of the salesperson, that they probably didn't know any different. So I used to lead with the compassion side of it and try and just understand that, like, I know the sales mentality, and maybe that's just the way that they've been trained to do it in other aspects, so that was the way they should be doing it on LinkedIn. So I used to try and just like, no, that's not how you do it here. Like it's actually going to hurt your process if you're going to do this. But over the last few years, I figure that has been touched on so many times that if somebody is going to say that they are, following social selling strategies, and that's the tactic they take, shame on them. They shouldn't be doing that stuff. It's bad. It leaves a bad, taste in people's mouth about what salespeople are about. And the whole idea behind leveraging LinkedIn as a sales platform is to be elevating the sales professional. It's by allowing you to have access to additional data and to insights. So when you reach out to me on LinkedIn, you're trying to sell me a lead list. I'm like, first of all, I don't do anything with lead list, 1. 2, do you know the company I work for? Why would I need a lead list from your company? And, it just shows that these people aren't actually doing the research. And that's what really frustrates me.
And I just kind of want to take a step back too. So if you are directing people to your LinkedIn profile, take the time to fill it out. LinkedIn is one of the coolest websites about you. You can produce and you can also drive a lot of traffic back to your main site. So take the time to add downloadable content, fill out all the fields, link back to your main site to feature pages, not just like download a trial, actual useful information. And it's just an extension of who you are and what you're doing. I think that drives the success. Like, yes, being engaged and noticing who's looking at your profile is key, but make sure when they land on your profile, they don't have to ask you what you do. It should all just be there for you. Use your headline as an explanation. Say what you do, so they're not like, okay, so you're John Smith. That's fantastic, but what do you do?
That's great.
Use your summary to say what you currently do. Now that you have 20 years of experience, do something. Say that, I can solve XYZ business problem for you now. Like, you really need to format it to serve your target audience. It's not about you. It's about them. And I think if you change your mindset that way, you'll be amazed at the success that you can drive through LinkedIn.
Yeah, and just to double click on that one. So within your profile, most salespeople, I'm very nerdy, and anybody who's known me for any amount of time, like I'm openly okay with being called a geek. I've had my own domain name for I don't even know how long. But most salespeople do not. Most people do not own their own domain name. But if you're watching this and you are in sales, you should own your own domain name anyway, just because that's where the world is going. But since most people don't have their own websites, your LinkedIn profile as a professional is your online identity. It gets so much SEO juice, and it has such an impact on what people view you as, that if you're not using that as your online identity or as part of your online identity, you're wrong. And it's not just about filling it out like it's your online resume. it should be, what Rachel was saying earlier, it needs to speak to your customer or to whoever your audience is. It can't be all about you. And you've got to add rich media. And I can't express this enough. Even if you're not the one creating these documents or these PDFs or these slide shares, by adding these things into your profile, it actually makes it more compelling. And as I have always said, when you turn your LinkedIn profile into a resource, you will find people coming back to it time and time again because they realize they're getting information from it. And that is like a virtual jab every single time somebody hits it because you're constantly feeding them information. And you should be updating the stuff that's in there and adding new stuff on a regular basis. And as that gets updated or stuff gets added new into these rich media components of your profile, it then goes out to your entire network. And then when somebody sees it and they like it or they comment on it, then it expands to their network. And you get this viral effect just by adding like interesting stuff into your profile so that people can gain value from it.
No, I mean, I love that, and I also think, it's funny, we talk about storytelling, but I often compare, when I hear someone tell me, well, my LinkedIn isn't any different than my resume, and I always kind of point to the idea, well, my resume won't win me a job against anybody line by line. My LinkedIn profile will, and to me, that's the difference. When you add those dynamic elements, you use it for storytelling.
That's awesome.
No, that to me is a true example. Like, I don't want to, if I drove someone to my website that had just my traditional resume on it, the ejection rate would be high, right? So if I drove someone to somewhere they not only saw my history, but they saw recommendations, they saw content I've created, presentations I've given, how I can tell stories in different ways, way I've engaged, awards you've won. I mean, I think there's this idea of your dynamic footprint and your dynamic first impression cannot be underestimated, especially in selling. But I mean, across the board, I've been watching Twitter, some of the conversations, lots of knowledge bombs. We are trending on Twitter already, so kudos to Koka Power. We can call that Koka Power right there. But one of the things I actually thought a lot of people were talking about, well, how I accept connection requests might be different. And I think everyone has a different aspect on how and who they accept. But I think you have to have a strategy behind it. It can't just be willy-nilly. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about, Koka, where you were saying, you have all these strangers, quote-unquote strangers. I think stranger's a weird word when I can give you enough social information about you that you're way more less a stranger than some of my friends that are in real life friends. But depending on what your strategy is, depends on who you accept. And some people kind of look at that and say, well, I don't want to accept someone that I haven't engaged with to LinkedIn yet because that's kind of my strategy. And I'm okay with that as long as there is a strategy and a reason behind it, not just like an all or nothing. What are your thoughts kind of on that? Because there's a lot of conversation on strategy of who and how often to accept people on the LinkedIn.
So, I don't talk about this a lot, but I do have a talk track on it. And I don't mean that as like a buzz term because I believe that there's a lot of people that are lost walking around this digital landscape and they don't know where they're going or they don't know what to do. In fact, it's one of like what I feel like part of my calling is in this world is to help people navigate that path. Especially it started off within social selling. And, I feel that everybody needs their own connection philosophy. And you hear about different connection philosophies in different ways. And I don't know if anybody actually uses it in that context. But there are some executives, some people that I've come across who literally say, unless I have met with you and shaking your hand, and I like you, we're never going to get connected on LinkedIn. They keep their network very closed off. And then there's what we were talking about before, these lions, that I will literally connect with anyone and anyone in the universe. I just want the numbers. And those are the two sides of the spectrum. And somewhere in your professional world, you need to figure out where you slide within that. And that's what I call your connection philosophy. And my personal one is that if I can add value to you, or if you can add value to me, I want to be connected with you. And it's not so that I can add a number to my number of connections or to the number of people I have following me. It's so that I can genuinely find new information or have a resource to ask questions if I need something. And I think that's where some people get lost with it, because they don't know what their own personal connection philosophy is. But I get a lot of questions. I get a lot of people who send me messages on LinkedIn or send me tweets asking me things. And I can't get to all of them. I try to, but I always want to try and help as many people out as I can. And on the same token, I reach out to people all the time. And I reach out to people that I would think that are much in the stratosphere when it comes to the celebrity of social media. And I'll reach out to them and say, hey, how did you do X, Y, and Z, or what are your thoughts about this? And I think one of the reasons why they're at that pinnacle is that they're able to respond. I'll use Jay Baer or Gary Vaynerchuk or any number of these these celebrities out there, these very well-known thought leaders, that they're paying attention. And I can't get upset if they can't answer everything I have, but when they do, it's always on point. And so I always try and emulate that in the things that I'm doing, to make sure that when somebody's reaching out to me, that I try and help them out in any way that I can.
Yeah, I have a really tactical strategy for LinkedIn, and I kind of always have. I was definitely more on the, if I haven't shaken your hand, I'm not going to connect. I've loosened up over the years, but for me, yeah, it definitely comes down to, did you take the time to craft a message? Like, did you showcase your value, or why you're connecting? I've connected with DJs and caterers because they reached out and they explained to me that they want to grow their business on social, and I was like, okay, thank you for explaining that, because otherwise you would have totally gone into the account bucket. But you took that 2 minutes and you crafted, a custom message, and sure, makes sense now. But for the most part, I am very cautious, and I try to stay within my realm. Because, yeah, delivering value is huge for me, and I have no desire to have an incredibly large network, because I can't possibly maintain the level of engagement that I strive for. So I'm going to keep it under a certain threshold if I can.
Just to add to that, I think that we can't stress enough the need for a customized invite, and it can't be done in every situation, and there's many reasons for that. But every opportunity that you have, anybody who's watching this, always craft something, and it doesn't need to be paragraphs long. It literally just needs to be what Rachel was saying was, I want to know X. You seem like a thought leader in the space. I just love to get connected with you. Just a little context around why it is that you want to connect goes a long way, and usually pushes the balance of me hitting the accept button versus hitting the decline.
Well, it's just like, you're not going to, it's that, am I going to go to a bar and throw my business cards on the bar and hope someone picks them up? Or am I going to wait there and shake someone's hand and introduce myself? And, that's true, they do that. And I think, I think this conversation is really interesting, because we're talking, a lot of these changes and a lot of this new philosophy. And there's knowledge bombs all over Twitter. But when we're talking about who owns social selling, and you kind of talked about the importance of understanding marketing. You've brought up the fact that you need to understand SEO, and that's some digital aspect. Okay, here's the question. Who owns social selling, or maybe who should own social selling as we're moving forward in 2015?
And please answer that in 2 parts, because I'm genuinely curious to know who you think is currently owning it and who should, because for me they're different. So I'm curious to hear your answer.
So I'm not going to give it as a cop out. I'm going to explain this answer, but it really depends, and it depends on a few different layers. It depends on who actually has the resources, the energy to be able to own it, and it depends on where the initiative is ultimately coming from. Traditionally, social selling has been owned by the sales organization, because the salespeople are the ones that are actually leveraging social media. What we are finding is that it's in some ways more effective when it's run through the marketing organization, and let me explain why. Because there's such a overlap between sales and marketing, or there should be an overlap in sales and marketing, that marketing should actually be enabling the social selling enablement of the sales team, because there is no social selling without the content aspects. And this is why when I talk to companies, I tell them that if you don't know who your marketing representative is within your organization, you need to find out right this minute. They're the people who are going to tell you what information is converting, what content is actually driving the views, or the downstream pipeline, or the inquiries, or whatever it may be. And taking that and then finding a way to leverage when we get into employee advocacy, how do you then take that information and then push it out through your entire network? It doesn't matter. I don't know if it really matters where it is owned by, as long as somebody is looking at it from that holistic point of view. Typically, marketing is better driven for that. It doesn't mean that sales cannot own it. It just means that in most aspects, marketing is better equipped to do it, and they have more resources around the training aspects of it. Sales managers, the progressive ones, in companies that I've met with or have come across, some sales organizations are extremely effective with this because it's a sales-driven company. And those sales-driven companies are able to then almost dictate what marketing is producing for them. And in that situation, it works perfectly fine. That the sales leadership is saying, hey, marketing, I need X, Y, and Z because this is the stuff that's going to be driving the inquiries that we can then convert. And in that situation, like, that is working out fine. But in companies where they don't know and they're looking around, they're like, who should own this? No, marketing needs to take the reins and just do it. And marketing, because marketing should be creating this stuff and then handing it off to the sales teams. The sales teams are constantly looking around like, what should I be sharing? What should I be talking about? Well, they just don't know. They know their product, they know the functionality, they know basically some stuff around their industry. But salespeople by far are not experts in their fields. So marketing should be educating the salespeople on what's going on in their industry. And the only way they're going to do that is by creating the right content, either branded or curating it from other people and sharing that over to the sales team and saying, this is what you guys need to know and this is what you need to be sharing with your networks.
So in my experience, social selling campaigns have been primarily marketing enabled. I haven't yet been involved with a campaign that was not started in sales, and my wish is that in the future it will be led by sales, because I think adoption will be faster and it would be long lasting, because it's always a fight right now, because sales thinks they know their customer. Marketing actually does, because we do the research. So I think that's why there's a huge disconnect, and I'm a big advocate for marketing and sales alignment. There's a long way to go there. I think we're just really in the early stages. It's very siloed in most companies.
It's siloed because they work in two different buildings in most cases. When I see sales and marketing alignment, truly, they're literally sitting in the same room. And I had the benefit, when I was on the sales solutions team, I sat in the middle of the salespeople, and I did that on purpose. One, because I like salespeople, but two, because I need to hear what's going on. I need to hear what they're talking about, and it actually benefits me more than it probably benefits them to hear about all the stuff that I'm talking about. But I would hear that reciprocity come back as well, like, hey, Koka, the way you were talking about that with whoever it was you were on the phone with actually made sense. You have to have, it's not just alignment, like, you need to be almost one organization. You have two different functions within that organization, but you need to be operating in lockstep. It still amazes me that there are marketing people out there that don't have to carry a number. And I don't mean about ultimately closing the business, but marketing should have a number of inquiries that then get converted into opportunities. And companies that, once they figure out how to do those metrics, it's not hard anymore. 5 years ago it was actually very difficult, but in this day and age it's not. Once marketing professionals realize, hey, I've got a number and I need to produce stuff that actually creates downstream metrics for the sales team, they'll figure it out really quickly.
Well,
I'm surprised that the marketing teams you talk to don't. Between like inbound traffic to your website, LinkedIn profile views, I mean, there's a lot to manage on a successful marketing team, and we have a lot of numbers to meet. So I'm jealous of those teams that don't have numbers.
Me too.
So as the I always say, like, the non-marketer, as soon as I hear marketing owning selling, social selling, I immediately picture lots of fluffy content that is fluffy selling content with no focus on engagement. And that's me stereotyping marketing, so I know that causes its own fluff. And my buddy Hoot Reed, he tweeted out the exact same time I did that the prioritization to publishing will outweigh the prioritization to engagement. And for me, I've always thought of it as not the owning of social selling, but true employee advocacy, when done right, allows everyone in the company to have an aspect of selling in their engagement, which is that social piece that goes above just marketing, giving a sales team stuff that sells. So I just wanted to put that out there, that although it makes sense to me, the teams that are doing it right are marketing teams that understand engagement is still important. They aren't the old school marketing teams that say, because you said they want them to have a number, and they're going to create, to me, then they're only going to create content and create, I'd say, social philosophy that is truly about the sell, not the actual building up of that entire relationship. And that worries me, because, I have yet to work as an employee in a marketing department that didn't have, when they did have a number, they stopped caring about the product, and they stopped caring about the community feedback, and they started caring about the sales team and getting the sales team stuff. And so I guess that's kind of my worry in that. Well,
I think that's almost taking it to an extreme in these companies. I mean, I think at the end of the day, when progressive marketers understand the different stages of the funnel. There's the top of the funnel that you have to meet, that's driving in the inquiries, but there's also the middle of the funnel. These are the people who understand what it is you're saying, but they just need more information. And then all the way down to the bottom of the funnel, where it comes to, hey, you brought me in, I know what this social selling thing is, but what product is actually solving this need? Or whatever, if it's not social selling, like whatever it is, if it's marketing automation, like I understand what marketing automation is, but how do I actually solve my business problem with it? And that's where you go into the bottom of the funnel. You have to create stuff across all three of those leverage points. Top of the funnel is very important. You have to find ways to drive the massive awareness. And that's where, small companies become big companies very quickly, or at least appear to be big companies very quickly. But you cannot forget the stuff that's in the middle, and you definitely cannot forget the stuff at the bottom, because if all you're doing is throwing in a bunch of fluff, by the time it gets to the bottom of the funnel where somebody says, hey, I actually need something to do X, Y, and Z, you can't deliver on that. Because you can talk a really good game, but you can't actually do anything. And I think if that's what a marketing team is doing, they're doing it wrong. That's my own opinion anyway.
Yeah, I think we all know fluff doesn't sell. Feature marketing is almost dead and gone, thank goodness. It's all about benefits and business solutions. So if you're a marketer and you're still trying to be fluffy and say you're number one, I think you're numbered.
Funny story. So
it's not a business differentiator. You need to tell me, how are you actually going to make me a better me?
My 6-year-old, he asked me yesterday, we were getting ready for bed, and something came on in commercial, and he says, Dad, why do all these laundry detergent companies say that they're number one? Which one is actually number one? I was like, this is a very deep conversation you're about to have with me, son. Exactly to that point. Like, you can't just be the best in everything.
No, if you're saying you're number one, chances are you're actually the worst.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same as, I'd say anybody that tells me that you have to go to their website to look at their culture, it's on their people's site. It's on their people's faces, not their website. And so I'm going to jump ahead to question 5. Is I love this dialogue. And I'm curious now is, for me, I'm a data geek. Koka, like yourself, I am proud and own the concept of being a geek on that side. And for me, data is the game changer. Data not only levels the playing field, but data is how I answer the ROI question. Data is how I truly document my wins, or I call it screenshot awesomeness. But when we're talking about these metrics that are important, what do you think are those metrics that are important to monitor when we're first kind of launching that strategy, and then kind of how those metrics kind of mold forward as we're talking about truly social selling metrics?
So, there's lots of things that you can measure. There's hundreds of touch points. In every company, it's going to be a little bit different because it depends on how you're set up and what you can measure. I think at the end of the day, again, I think one of the things that Sales Navigator, out of the box when it first launched, that they wanted to make sure that they were able to show measurement, the ROI to the leadership was, are people getting connected to the right decision makers? And if you're connecting with the right people, that's a leading indicator. At least it means that you're doing something right to get in front of the right decision makers. When it comes to social selling and the ROI, it really comes down to, are these activities that you're taking, are the social engagements that you're having, are the things that you're sharing within the social ecosystem, are they actually driving value? And there's many ways to do that. There's a lot of nerdy, tracking codes or SRC codes you can add to stuff, but we see that it works. And when you get to a point where you get into employee advocacy and you start having tools that are brought in that are helping manage those tracking mechanisms, then you can really start seeing the ROI. And in my world, when I was making the transition from sales into marketing, and I looked at, it was a big decision to make before I went into marketing, because I didn't have a really good relationship or a good idea of what marketing was supposed to be doing. And I looked at anybody I could that had a social marketing title within LinkedIn, or anybody that I had known. And what I found had actually startled me, and it scared me almost to the point that I almost didn't take this new job. And it probably, obviously, I wouldn't be here today, but I took the risk. Was that of the people that I found, most of them had only been in their jobs for maybe 6 to 8 months. The lifespan of a social marketing professional was 6 to 8 months. And it was because they are not able to show the ROI of their work. Because at the end of the day, when the senior leadership, the executive says, why are we paying this person? If you're not able to say, I'm actually contributing in these ways, and it's got to be business impact. And to me, business impact was money. If you weren't able to do this, you're going to be out of a job because you can't justify either getting a paycheck or having the position open. So within social selling, it is almost the same thing, but it's actually very tied to the revenue model as opposed to a lot of the engagement side. But all the engagement, all of the connections, all of the stuff that you're doing should ultimately lead out. It should be the leading indicators to actually building your pipeline. And there's Jack. I'm going to mess up his last name. Kasakawi, am I saying that right?
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. Sorry, Jack. Don't be mad. He was actually saying that one of the things that he is becoming much better at is how does he measure that ROI? And he's actually, when I talked to him, he and I had a phone call a little while back. It was actually very enlightening to me to actually see how far salespeople have come in this space of being able to track the ROI of their activity. And I think it's just a trend. We're going to see more and more of it. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I love it. I think tracking is key. I think we forget a lot of really basic technologies. UTM codes. Like, you want to know what posts are driving the most traffic? Put it into Google Analytics. I mean, this is not rocket science, people. You can track anything these days. It's just you got to build the foundation, set it up, and the ROI is clear. So I'll step up my soapbox.
Especially because
salespeople own their own lead gen. If a marketing department is generating 30% of the lead volume, they're doing amazingly well. 30%. So if salespeople are, so in most companies it's going to be closer to 15 to 20. But even at the high end of 30, if sales professionals are required to be building 70% of their own pipeline by generating their own leads, they have to be able to leverage social media the right way, because it's the only thing that's going to scale in this day and age to hit the numbers that companies are expecting them to hit right now. And when they're doing it effectively, when they're not going in for the hard sell, when they're actually building relationships, yes, it takes more time, but the output, the residual effects of that reap rewards for years because they become an actual trusted resource within their industry.
And I think people also, I'm going to kind of add on to that, is the scale. When you're doing that effectively, it's not just a one-to-one, it's a one-to-many, but in a one-to-one context, which is really beneficial. Like, you can't even quantify how amazing that is from a marketing or sales perspective. You're building awareness by your one-to-one conversations at mass scale, particularly on Twitter, where your tweets can be retweeted 100 times in the space of 5 minutes. You can't imagine how that's growing your brand awareness, which leads to referrals. It's an ongoing referral engine that you don't even have to maintain. It's just you kind of put it in motion, and if you do it right, it's self-fulfilling as you go down.
Well, I think part of that problem is when you do it right, it does take time. And I think I was surprised how many salespeople were really great at documenting the customer's path to purchase offline. Yet when I was explaining how you were doing that online on social selling, they kind of looked like there wasn't a availability to do that. And I almost feel like there's more data and more information out there today to document that customer's path to purchase than there was when you were doing it offline. So I think that's kind of one of the things that I'm excited is not only educating them on the basics, like you said, Rachel, but I think also on the opposite side, understanding data a little bit better so that they can leverage that. So we've kind of skipped around questions, Koka, because the conversation's been so good we haven't even dropped in all of our questions. So our audience has now realized that this is all about as much value as we can provide. We're not set to any questions. But the last one I do want to get your insight on. Predictions for the future of social and sales, especially because a lot of this conversation we're talking about is a little bit of revisiting the old, a little bit of a new team owning it, a little bit about data. So what are your predictions on this social and sales? I think it probably goes into a little bit on what your new role is over there at LinkedIn.
So my prediction is that we haven't even hit the tipping point yet. In fact, all data suggests that we've seen is that social selling is just scratching the surface. And I think that in the next year or two, we're really going to see how this is making a shift. And I don't want to, I don't want to overly promote the LinkedIn ecosystem too much, but I do drink the Kool-Aid here. The fact that we can measure this is extremely impressive and impactful. that we can measure based on the social selling index of an individual or a company or an industry where people are going to be, and be able to look at that data and say, Brian, you're at a 56. The average sales rep is at a 60 to 70. 70 is doing really well. All you need to do are these 7 things to get up there. And being able to do that at scale and doing it for an entire company or doing it for an entire industry, I think that's where the future is. I truly believe that this social selling index, or being able to measure the impact of social media, is going to have a huge impact in the industry. And as we get better, and we just started publishing some recently case studies, but as we get better at finding the revenue impact of these great social sellers, the people who are measuring high, we're going to realize that you're doing your company a disservice by not doing it. That when we can look at a company and say, based on the social selling index, here are the top 10 people. And when they look at us and say, how do you know who our top 10 reps are? We can say, we can see it in their scores. We know who's actually leveraging social media the right way. And as we get better at measuring that algorithm and creating better scores on sales reps, I think the future is going to hold a great shift in how business is done. And we're already seeing it in some scale. And the social business concept has been around now for maybe a decade, give or take. And I think that as it's applying to the sales ecosystem, we're about to see a pretty big shift, because we're now able to measure. And it's not just, granted, drinking the Kool-Aid of LinkedIn, there's the social selling index, but there's other indicators out there. And any way that you can measure this impact and be able to say that this stuff is actually driving these conversations is going to be, it's going to have a major impact in the industries that they're being implemented in.
No, I love it. That not only proving the ROI, but that gives someone the, I think unfortunately still to this day we have people that say, if you go to the bar and buy the round of happy hour, that's selling. And yet if you're going through LinkedIn profiles, they say, why the hell are you sitting there not selling? And I think that hopefully, part of that is driving that change in conversation by educating on those wins. And I like the idea, a little bit of gamification, a little bit of documenting. I think the training is probably the hardest part. I think, and we'll see where, things go. I still think the learning curve on really how to be great on social isn't, it's still very steep in that sense as well. But this was awesome. The conversation was great. Not only for me, trending on Twitter is a lot less valuable than great actionable takeaways. Rachel and I built Social Selling Hour. I remember verbatim out of her mouth when she said, Brian, I want to work with you, but only on a chat that actually provided actionable insights for our community that are tuning in, spending an hour of their day with us. And I think that is defined with what this hour was. So, Koka, big thanks to you. That was it was awesome.
No,
of course,
this is all mine.
They can find you on LinkedIn. But any other links or documents? I know we have a really good white paper that I know you have out there with some use cases that will make sure it gets out in the feed. But anything else you want to leave us with on that side before we jump out of here?
No, thank you again for the opportunity, everybody who tuned in today. If you have any questions at all, feel free to either send me a message on LinkedIn or connect with me on Twitter, and then and send me a tweet.
Actually, that's where you're supposed to delegate and say, just tweet at Carlos. Right now that you have Carlos in your old role, you say, you don't even have to connect with me now.
Carlos Steele 83, bypass together and just go to him.
I love it. That's the way to do it. This was awesome. Rachel, anything else on our side? As always, millennialceo.com/sbizhour to watch any of the last 55 or 56 episodes of the show that we've had now for well over a year. Thank you to our sponsor, IBM and New Way to Work. Check out ibm.com/verse to check out their new email solution. Rachel, I'll give you the last words.
It's been a huge honor, Koka, and I wish everybody a fantastic week.
Bye, everyone.